producing a thing is very different from consuming it. Don't let your emotions conflate the feeling of consuming that entertainment with what it actually takes to get that thing made, especially in a very competitive and oftentimes rough and tumble kind of industry that we have in animation, video games, film. Welcome to this week's Animators Journey podcast episode. I'm your host, Lucas Ridley, and this week I'm going to be talking all about the negatives and the downsides of working in the animation industry, and I'm going to keep it real. You won't be able to find this kind of information necessarily very easily online because most people don't like to talk about this. This is the difficult side of things that people tend to worry about repercussions, maybe from their employers or what have you. Obviously, whatever opinions or things I'm saying are not reflections of any of my employers, past, present, future. This is just my view of what I see in the industry and what I've experienced, what I've heard other people's experience, and trying to bring that to you in the most kind of honest and authentic way possible in this podcast. So you're not going into learning animation or pursuing a career in animation without the realities of what occurs. Now, most of what I'm going to say is probably going to be true for every industry to some degree. So some of this isn't going to be very specific to animation. So you'll be able to find negatives in any job that you pursue. That's just the reality of working in the workforce. And even if you work for yourself, that's going to be true. You're going to find negatives of working with yourself. But so I want to keep this honest and straightforward and to the point so we can just jump in. But before we get started, I want to say if you want to begin your animator's journey or want to continue it, I have beginner and intermediate available now on animatorsjourney.com with the advanced course coming soon. Animatorsjourney.com is where I have created these kind of flagship master classes in animation for whatever stage of development that you're in your own journey. So it's a simplified, accelerated approach with mentorship from me. I hope to see you there. So let's get started with the podcast. First, long hours. So crunch time is a known thing in the animation industry. I'm sure other industries have it as well, but it's much more prevalent, I think, in animation because of the project type cycle that we have. A movie begins, a movie ends, and then the next one begins, and the next one ends, or it's a video game or a commercial, and there's a natural project cycle. And when deadlines approach, then crunch time can come into play. Doing OT, working on weekends. It depends on the studio you're at, the project you're on, who's managing it. There's a lot of variables at play. And if you Google this subject, you'll be able to find plenty of articles about crunch time and all these horror stories of working in the industry. And I can say from my experience, I've only experienced that a little bit, and it's not at every job and every project where there are these horror stories that you might be able to read in the media. Not to say that they don't happen and those stories aren't valid. It's just that there's I think an availability bias when you tend to look at the negative press and then you think that's all that exists in the industry. That's not necessarily the case, and what could be known as an availability bias based on you having an impression based on what's the knowledge and stories that are available to see. So take that everything with a grain of salt that you read online in general and diffuse it over a long-term career, and you can gauge maybe how much you're going to interact with those negative aspects of the industry. Same thing like what I'm describing here. Personally, I can say I feel like I've been pretty lucky. As I'm speaking now, I'm not speaking for any past, present, or future employer. I'm speaking merely from experience in terms of what I've seen in the industry and what I've personally experienced. And I can say that my experience has been pretty positive over the last 11 plus years that I've been working in the industry. And that's what I ideally am sharing with you in these podcast episodes. If you want to hear more, definitely check in all the previous episodes and the future ones to come out. So long hours are a thing. Just be prepared for that. If you're intending to pursue this as a career, this is going to be the nature of the game to some degree or another. And you may already be finding that out as you're studying animation. Animation takes time. It's a time-consuming process. And that's going to be true when you're learning it as much as when you're actually doing it on production. So you need to be prepared and patient for that process and all of the different ways that it rears its head in terms of learning it and being frustrated and hitting barriers and not understanding things versus being in a production and things aren't ready, or you're being asked to iterate on the same shot for months to even years, depending on the project you're working on. I've opened up shots that have the first time they were saved by someone else was from a couple of years ago. And things change, things iterate, especially with the pandemic, things stop production, things pick back up production. A lot of things can happen in a production. And as a part of the workforce, to some degree or other, that's all going to fall on your shoulders to keep moving the ball forward on a project. So the next thing is, this is a competitive industry. I think earlier in my career, I heard there's as many professional football players, American football, as there is actual professional animators in the industry. I don't think that's necessarily true, but it's probably not too far off. If it was easy, everyone would be doing it, maybe. I don't know. Maybe some people don't want to animate. But if it was easy, there'd be a lot more people doing it. This is tough for a reason, because it is a difficult thing to do to a high quality level, and it's difficult to pick up. That's just the nature of the game of most any artwork or any skill that you're trying to pick up. If you're trying to be a concert pianist, that's probably the same story there. You're not just going to walk into the symphony orchestra of whatever city and start playing piano or doing whatever instrument you're trying to learn. It takes time. You have to be patient, and you have to be prepared for that competitive nature in terms of where the bar is currently set. And that bar keeps raising. It seems the more I look at student work, the better and better it seems to be getting. And the more prevalent the education becomes, the more access people have to it, and the more kind of democratic that the talent is going to get in terms of how widespread the talent can be, from graphically to the technology barrier lowering, so you don't have to have an amazing expensive computer to do this stuff. In many ways, this is becoming a more competitive industry, and you just need to be prepared for the fact that you can't just open up Maya or Blender and take a couple tutorials and then expect to get hired at a studio. It's unrealistic, and it's not going to happen. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it's better to learn this stuff now than years down the road of being frustrated. So it's competitive. So the quality, one of the most important things. And partly that's why I teach, because it's really difficult to get there on your own. And so that's why I've made courses where I mentor people on the side as well from my day job currently as a lead animator. Next thing is high standards, kind of off the back of the competitive industry. There are very high standards in terms of quality, and you're expected to meet that, as well as speed. So speed as well as quality are part of the things that are on the job. Sometimes that you can feel a lot of pressure from that when you're in the job to get the job done. And just with it being competitive, you can see the other work that's getting done around you, and maybe your stuff isn't as good, or you're working slower, or who knows what. And there can be stress and pressure from maybe management or just your own internal pressure, seeing that maybe you're feeling behind at work to a degree. Especially if you're starting out, there's a lot of insecurities or imposter syndrome that you have to overcome. And that usually doesn't go away because there's always someone who's going to be better, faster, whatever than you. So that's something that you have to get used to in terms of your own skill level and ready to be constantly learning. So that's the next thing. Constantly learning. We are in a technology sector, so you're going to have to come to terms with always being adaptable to what the new technology is, new software coming out, pipelines changing. When you go to a new studio, they're going to have a different pipeline than the place that you learned from, or the studio that you were at before, or the school that you learned at. You need to be constantly adapting to management styles as well as technological advances, and also keeping sharp. Animation is a skill, and if you're not doing it, then that skill is going to be dull, and you want to stay sharp. So this is one of the things that you tend to find people doing even after hours, because you can be on a project for, let's say, a year or two and not be given the type of animation work that you want to be hired for. So then after a year, you don't have anything to show for the job that you want. So that means you'll have to be working after hours at your job, after your job at home, in addition to your day job. Now, I think animation may be unique to this in some regards. I've talked to a couple look dev artists who I was trying to get their help on look deving an animation character I'm developing for Animators Journey. And I've at least ran into two people who are look dev and texture artists who don't even own the software that they use at work at home. So they don't even own a personal license to the software that they use professionally, just don't even touch the work they do when they go home. And I don't know if I've met an animator who has had that be a part of their story in their journey. I think most animators, especially when you're starting out, have had to juggle working at a studio and then also continuing to do animation at night if you're really trying to pursue an advancement or switching from one discipline in animation to another. For example, commercials to TV or TV to film or VFX film to feature film. You can always find yourself juggling multiple things at work and then at home. And that might be unique to animation in some regards. So that has to do with constantly learning and staying sharp. So the next thing are creative kind of constraints where your job is to make someone's vision come true. You can inject your own direction and ideas, but at the end of the day, when you get feedback, it's your job to implement that feedback, understand what you're being told, and do what they see in their mind's eye, not what you see. So you need to be able to interpret what they're doing, what they're saying rather, and you need to be able to apply that to your own animation. One of the difficult times it could be that you disagree with their direction. That's part of the job. They're in charge, they're giving the creative direction, and you need to try to execute it to the best of your ability, even if you disagree with it or you think it's actually going to make your animation look worse. Yeah, which can happen depending on who's giving the notes or what kind of iterations they're asking for. It's not uncommon to be given a note and actually have it be a lateral change. So sometimes you can feel like Sisyphus moving the boulder up the mountain where feel like you're not really getting anywhere in terms of your animation, or sometimes you're even going backwards if you're having to do notes that you don't agree with or think is making your animation look worse. But trust the process and you'll get through it. That's just part of working in the industry as basically a blue collar artist, and your job being to make someone else's vision come true. So there's technical complexity you'll need to be prepared for as well. As you get into animation, things are going to get more complicated. You'll get thrown things that you're not prepared for or don't feel like is in your job description. You need to be able to adapt and roll with stuff and also learn as you go, what we've already talked about, but on a technical level. Let's say you might need to learn something about constraints or how a certain pipeline works to be able to get your animation to work within the game that you're working on, a video game or in a new visual effects pipeline, what have you. It can always be changing, and you need to have a technical mindset as much as animation mindset. I've had that prove to serve me well, and it's also a sticky situation you can get in. And if you are seen as the technical guy, then maybe you might get pulled off of more animation tasks and be given more technical tasks. So you also have to be careful about how you're juggling, kind of showing those skills to the people that you're working with. Freelance versus full-time. So there are different types of contracts that you can get. And the reality is even staff jobs are not safe. I've had friends who have been let go from staff jobs quicker than I've had a short-term contract end. So there really is no safety net here. This is a very kind of tumultuous industry. Projects come and go. Netflix decides to cut a show, or Disney Plus budgets cut, or the quarterly revenue isn't where they want it, or who knows what. Things can get cut at the drop of a hat. People can get let go all the time. These are business. They're running it like a business. So you need to be prepared for that. So it may feel cutthroat in that way where you see these layoffs or people let go. That happens in every industry as well. We just saw that with the technology sector recently, where there were thousands of people let go from their jobs who may have done amazing work. And that doesn't matter to the bottom line of the company when their profits aren't where they need to be for reasons outside of your control. So you need to be prepared for that kind of thing when you're jumping into a job that, even if the contract says it's a year contract, you could be asked to take an unpaid hiatus. I know that's a common practice for one studio, unfortunately, because it seems to be a breach of contract. But anyways, there's kind of bizarre practices like that used in the industry to lower their payroll or whatever reasons are going on behind the scenes. I'm not going to speculate, but the result of those things can be that you're out of a job and not being paid, even though when your contract says you should be getting paid. So those are things to be aware of. There are wage collusion scandals that you can research where multiple studios colluded to suppress wages, and they were fined, I think, $100 million in wage theft. And these are big name companies that if I said them, you would know them. You can just Google this, wage theft or whatever in the animation industry, and you'll be able to find what I'm talking about. but that's not uncommon. They did it out in the open. It was like an open secret, I think. And they finally just got called to the mat on that. But you can read more details about that. And just so you're not going into this with rose-colored glasses, these companies are out to make a profit and you're their employee. And the more they can reduce labor costs, the more profit they're able to make. These are common business practices. Unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't make them legal, but there are unfortunately things like that you're going to encounter in any industry where maybe overtime's not counted or wage theft is occurring on one level or another. So that kind of overlaps with job stability kind of topic in the sense that it's not super stable depending on what you're looking for. So game companies are more stable in the sense that the project cycle is longer. Films are a bit shorter. Commercials are even shorter. I've worked at studios where not animators necessarily, but other people in the pipeline will sit next to me for a single day at a commercial studio. And they were only hired for that day. And then they're gone the next day. And then someone new sits down next to me. And then the next day, another person new sits down next to me. So there can be a very kind of short-lived stability for your freelance path, if that's the way you're going, depending on the market that you're living in, or now with COVID, things can be a bit more remote, but that seems to be changing a little bit where studios are trying to, I think, justify maybe, I don't know, their rent or something, who knows, or their culture. I'm not entirely clear. It's different for every studio. Not going to speculate again, but just be aware things are always changing and job stability is in flux always, even if you're a staff position. So on top of all this, you can get burnout. If you search artists' names or studios' names and burnout, I'm sure you can find articles about people having YouTube blogs about it or having articles written about it. There is a friend of mine who was actually quoted in an article from a tweet that he wrote, and they didn't even ask his permission to use it in the article. They just grabbed it off of Twitter and ran it with a headline of his tweet. So be careful of the things you say in general, but also be aware that tweet was just about burnout, I think, and the instability of the industry in regards to why they left the industry. So burnout can happen, and that's, I think, something to be prepared for in terms of juggling everything I've described so far, from the high standards to the competitiveness to having to constantly be learning or keeping your skills sharp. You'll want to keep an eye on your personal energy level and keeping your cup full in terms of energy and creative power and however else you want to phrase that. But basically, you want to make sure that you're not going to empty all the time. Otherwise, it's not sustainable and you may end up having to take a break from this as a career or leave it altogether. To be honest, I can say there's more than one colleague who has pined about leaving the industry. And that is a common trait, I think, among the people who are in it longer. And they're trying to figure out, where does this go and how long they can last being in it. Sitting at a computer 8 hours a day, it can be tough on your body. And the types of projects or maybe political situations internally in a studio, being passed over for promotions or advancement in your role, or being straight up gaslit about your own abilities to suppress your wages or performance review, or to scapegoat you because they messed up the schedule, or all kinds of things can happen that are unpleasant in the industry. And not to say that happens everywhere, disclaimer, blah, blah, blah. You get what I'm saying, but things can happen and you just want to be prepared that not everything is going to work out just perfectly and to your liking all the time. And I think going into this, not being naive and having a realistic understanding of the business and what your role is inside of it will make your expectations be a bit more accurate and less painful when you're confronted with the realities of the things I've been discussing in this podcast. I'm trying to think about how to end on a lighter note here as we get close to the end here. But yeah, okay, so pay disparities. We've talked a little bit about wage collusion historically has happened. I've also known of people who have had similar level of experience and are in a similar title role, get paid thousands and thousands of dollars less than me. And I'm sure the true is the other way, that I've been paid less than someone else of a similar standing. I've been told performance doesn't matter. So in terms of getting paid more, you can be told all kinds of crazy stuff for people to justify maybe why they're not giving you a raise, and they're totally valid reasons because they're the ones in charge determining that stuff. I'm going to delete all this maybe because I'm starting to ramble, and these are the kinds of things that people don't want to talk about, right? You don't want to be seen as a troublemaker or be blacklisted or whatever it is by divulging kind of the inner workings of the industry. So this is why this kind of information is hard to find, to be fair. And, this isn't something I do lightly, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully, but I wanted to make this podcast episode. You're not going into, let's say, even your most favorite big name studio that you would want to go to, and you get there and realize it's not perfect. No place is going to be perfect. It's unrealistic to expect that. You're always going to run into some issues, whether you go into animation or not. That's just the reality of having a career. You need to just be prepared for that reality, be adaptable to the situation you're in, have a thick skin in general, because animation, you take a lot of feedback and you need to be prepared to iterate on your own work, throw things away, work on something for 3 months, have it be cut from the film entirely. There's all kinds of things that can happen. You can have your computer crash 10 times a day, and then you be blamed that you're slow, even though you can prove that the computer's crashing and you were working on a scene of 300 characters, but your supervisor doesn't care. And they're, I don't know, maybe trying to scapegoat you because they messed up the schedule and expected the technical side to be working when it wasn't. And so they need someone to place the blame on, and maybe that's you, or maybe that's someone you know. If you talk to anyone in the industry, they're going to have kind of war stories they could drone on and on about. And part of being in the industry as well is letting that stuff run off your back like water off a duck, or I don't know, whatever that analogy is, because you also don't want to be seen. It's good to be honest and open and that kind of a thing. At the same time, you don't want to be seen as a negative person or someone who focuses on the negative things. If I didn't enjoy working in this industry, I wouldn't be in it anymore. I definitely wouldn't be teaching it. I think it has amazing opportunities and upsides and fulfillment as a career. At the same time, I wanted to put out an episode like this, clearly communicates the things to be aware of. And this is maybe even just scratching the surface in terms of what to be aware of, but I think it's a decent overview of what to have healthy concern and awareness over. So hopefully this has been helpful to kind of open your eyes a little bit and not just go watch some movie on a streaming service or in the movie theater and think because that looks amazing or you have an emotional connection to that story or movie or video game, that making that thing is equally going to have that emotional fulfilling connection that you had when you actually consume the thing. Producing a thing is very different from consuming it. So just be aware of that and don't let your emotions conflate the feeling of consuming that entertainment with what it actually takes to get that thing made, especially in a very competitive and oftentimes rough and tumble kind of industry that we have in animation, video games, film. It's entertainment. This is Hollywood. This is all the kind of cliches I could throw at you right now. Them are the breaks, whatever old-timey phrases I could say. But yeah, so that is all the kind of healthy dose pill medicine, hopefully, that you've just received from this podcast episode. If you have been dissuaded from pursuing animation based on this episode, then I don't think animation was ever for you, because it's only going to get more difficult than what me talking about this for 20 or 30 minutes is like. You need to be prepared for this, not just in a 30-minute little podcast episode. You need to be prepared to show up at work and deal with any or all or more of these things that could be thrown at you every day in your job. Again, flip side, sometimes it's great. Most of my career, it has been smooth sailing. I've had amazing people that I work with. I could barely even count on one hand the kind of negative experiences I've had. And so I would say I would count myself lucky in many regards, because I know that may not be the case for everyone. And good luck to you if you decide to pursue this as a career. I recommend keeping a healthy reality check on your own skills and where you stand and how far you have to go to be competitive in the job market. And having a good mentor or someone you can reach out to give you that honest feedback is incredibly invaluable, to the tune of maybe many years of your life, many thousands of dollars down the drain if you're pursuing a master's that you don't need, or who knows what. Getting honest feedback is incredibly important. So definitely always pursue that so that you aren't spinning your wheels going after a career that maybe you're not prepared for, or have the tenacity or a kind of patience maybe to put up with what it takes to actually get to a hireable state. As someone who sells people courses online, this isn't obviously a sales pitch. This is the anti-sales pitch. If you think this is not for you, do not do it. Don't waste your time. Don't enroll in my course. Don't enroll in any course unless you want it as a hobby. That's definitely an avenue you could pursue. To give you another reality check, because I feel like people who want to go into for a hobby want to start the equivalent of the kind of cliche of everyone having a children's book they want illustrated. Everyone has maybe a short story they want to tell. It took me 1 year of full-time work when I was in school, working 16 to 18-hour days. The last 6 months of that year, I took 2 days off. Not 2 days off a week. I took 2 days off over a 6-month period. I was working literally around 16 hours a day for those 6 months, 7 days a week. It's difficult. And I came out with a minute, 2, I can't remember how long my short film was, my student short film. Just to even develop a character for Animators Journey that you can see on the homepage if you're interested, has taken months and months of development and thousands of dollars. So if you want to have a high quality character designed, rigged, textured, groomed, animated, you are in for a long haul. And if you want to have multiple characters, get ready to spend tens of thousands of dollars. That's what that costs. That's what you're going to spend learning how to do this stuff, or time spent in your free time doing it, or paying someone else to do it. This stuff is expensive because it's time consuming, and there's no way around that. Maybe with AI, it's going to change the game there, but I don't think anytime soon necessarily, based on what I've described here, where this is a very iterative process that you need very fine control over. And that's just not where AI is at right now. Trying not to go off on a tangent right now, but AI, I have a whole other episode, a podcast episode you can check out about AI, where I talk more about my thoughts on that. Hopefully this has been good for you and shedding some realistic light on pursuing this as a career. I hope to see you in the industry, because it needs more people with grit and creative ideas and go-gettedness. It's late here and I'm losing my words. So hopefully you know what I'm talking about. But thanks for watching. If you want to learn more from me, check out animatorsjourney.com and the focused, accelerated, and simplified approach to learning animation that I've developed there, and then hopefully sharing with you if you choose to enroll. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time on the Animators Journey podcast.